Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions, your premier platform for real-time global insights. Checking on first on the last 3 days worth of precipitation through early this morning, we can see that much of the country was quite dry. There were scattered storms down in parts of southern Texas. There's a cutoff low that's trying to cut into parts of the Pacific Northwest, and we did get some showers that came out of the Canadian prairies into Ontario. But of course, Hurricane Sally has been the main focus of our weather forecast here for the last couple of days, and you can see the rainfall amounts here. We're kind of saturating my color bar here that I usually use for the 3-day amounts, which goes up to 10 inches. So I adjusted things and made a much higher color bar, there. And what we've seen here is through parts of southern Alabama getting into the Florida Panhandle and over to Georgia, there's a pretty wide sector here that's at least got, if you just look at this color here, that's 6 to 7 inches. You see a lot of that. We do also find a few quarters like right in through here and also down in this part of the Panhandle where we're talking about rainfall amounts that are ranging anywhere between 15 and over 20 inches. So this has been a pretty devastating system in terms of the wind damage and also due to the storm surge along the coast and finally due to the rainfall. To show you what made it so problematic, this is a long radar animation showing you how the system really stalled out right there along the coast. And that's usually the biggest problem with any tropical system is if it slows down and kind of sits and spins over one area, it has the potential to produce just a tremendous amount of rain over one particular spot. Once it did get inland, you can see it moved pretty quickly through early this morning, getting through Alabama and over to Georgia. But I want you to watch this one more time to show how this slowed down here on the 16th and just sat over that part of southern Alabama and the Florida Panhandle, just dumping tremendous amounts of rainfall. We'll get better estimates on total amount of damage out of this in the next few days here, and we'll certainly keep you up to date on what we were able to find. From there, I would like to show you a satellite animation yesterday, just as the sun was setting here on Sally, as you see right there at the very end. And once again, we are seeing such widespread smoke from the fires that are in the western part of the United States. And there isn't much relief in the forecast here if you're south of Oregon. So that includes California, Nevada, the Four Corners states. But I do have some good news for what's going to be happening in parts of Oregon, Washington, and parts of the Pacific Northwest. Other than that, you can see the frontal boundary that's coming right in through this area. And we're going to be getting much cooler weather that's coming in parts of the Corn Belt, the Midwest, the Great Lakes states. But we certainly have to take a look at where Sally is going and also several of the tropical systems as well. So let's get right into this. This is the Day 1 Storm Prediction Center convective outlook, and we have basically our two lows that are causing our problems. Sally over there in the southeast, giving us a slight risk for strong to severe storms in through this area on its eastern edge. And then as the trough cuts into the Pacific Northwest, we're going to watch right here up along the Cascade Mountains, really in the I-5 corridor for the potential for some strong to severe storms as well. Let's play out our high-resolution NAM model to see where this is going. We're going to stop this right here early this morning. So this was last night's run, okay? So this is 6 a.m. We can see the broad shield of precipitation spreading across parts of northern Georgia into the Carolinas. As we go throughout the day today, this is Thursday, midday, getting into the evening hours, we can see just how far to the north this rain shield will spread on the northeast side of Sally, now getting up into parts of Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. You do notice that the high-res NAM model is trying to kick off these squall line type features to the south, which is why we're concerned about the possibility of having some strong straight line winds out of some of these systems. And of course, just simply due to the circulation around a hurricane, you can have embedded tornadic circulations there as well. Then this evening, you can see the NAM model is picking up on the potential for some storms in the Pacific Northwest, running right there, like we just discussed, into this part of Oregon. So working our way into Friday, what we see here is that Sally will be out, looks like about 7 to 10 a.m. in the morning. It's finally moving its way offshore. We're going to start to turn our attention then to the deeper trough that is coming through the Northwest and how it will be getting into the north central plains of the United States. And then we're going to be talking a lot about what's coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. Seen some changes here in the overnight model runs that I think are important for us to be discussing. So quick update here, European model picking up on what precipitation is left from Sally. We do expect to see really in through parts of Georgia and the Carolinas here getting up to Virginia, a corridor in here that could have another 4 to 5, maybe 6 inches of rainfall right into this area. We will get some mountain enhancement right in through here as well, but the rainfall totals that you see here from the European model, I think the Europeans been doing a very good job on picking up on the rain from Sally, so I expect it to continue to do so. Now what I'd like to do for you next is a bit of a model comparison through the middle part of our video today. I'm just going to animate for you here what the latest European model suggests the precipitation patterns are going to look like through the next, I'm going to go ahead and play it out to 10 days. Now we know that the farther out we get in these model forecasts, the more uncertainty there will be. But if you notice, there's four areas I think we should be talking about. Sally's first, which we discussed. Secondly, what is coming out of the Bay of Campeche that might possibly be increasing rainfall chances and possibly even tropical cyclone development here in this part of the Gulf, cutting into this section of Texas over to Louisiana and Mississippi. You then saw this deep trough that cut through the Great Lakes states, really increasing precipitation chances here. That was our next system. And look at the rainfall amounts we could be getting in the Pacific Northwest as we continue to see troughs cutting into the Gulf of Alaska. Finally, we have to talk about what is happening potentially with Teddy interacting with the Northeast and the Canadian Maritimes. But I will tell you something. Up until about day 5, we have pretty solid model agreement, but beyond day 5, the models really diverge in what they show, and I'm going to explain that to you in just a few moments. So first, let's get into the tropics. The National Hurricane Center, again, is currently monitoring these 6 separate areas. And the two that I really want to be discussing are where Teddy is going to be going and also what's happening right here in the Bay of Campeche, where early this morning the National Hurricane Center has given this area a 70% chance of development. And I see why. When I look in here at the satellite animation, looking at yesterday into the overnight hours, you're going to watch some pretty well-defined convection starting to show up in this area. We'll need to be watching carefully to see if it takes on some sort of a sense of rotation here in the near term, but certainly I don't see evidence of strong wind shear in this vicinity, and therefore the probability of this continuing to develop is relatively high. So the European ensemble's got quite a bit of spread, but it's taking that cluster of storms and generally advecting or moving it in some direction to the north. And therefore, over the weekend, we're going to have to watch carefully to see how this cluster of thunderstorms in the tropics develops, because should it, again, get over the very warm waters in the Gulf with a low wind shear environment, we would expect this to organize into a low pressure cell and then, of course, have the potential to develop into a tropical depression, maybe a tropical storm or a hurricane as it moves towards the Texas-Louisiana coast. So that's going to be my greatest concern for the southern part of the United States moving forward in this forecast. You see, the European ensemble is saturated here on precipitation anomalies as that slowly moves into this area, with some locations capable of picking up an additional, now again, this is compared to normal, an additional 6 to 10 inches of rainfall here in the Gulf through the next 10 days. The question is, how far inland does this potentially make it? And we're going to take a look at that in just a few moments. But next, I'd like to show you Teddy. So the European model and the GFS have different ideas on this. The bigger image in the back is the European. The one embedded on the right is the GFS. And the ideas really start to change right here. You can see that the European model has a few of its ensemble members pulling the eventual track of Teddy in and toward maybe the northeast of the Canadian Maritimes, whereas the GFS tends to want to keep this much farther out to open ocean. And I want to show you what's going on there. So we're going to start off with the European model, the operational run from last night, the 0Z run, looking here at upper level heights. So this is troughs and ridges. As I play it forward, let's just get you through the next couple of days here. You see there is a deeper trough, if I just let you play this again, that cuts through the Great Lakes, and that's going to be the source of our cooler air moving into the eastern half of the U.S. The rainfall that you saw a moment ago, well, that's this cutoff low that's sitting here, kind of just pushing on the south side quite a bit of moisture into Oregon and Washington. Out ahead of it, pretty sizable ridge develops, and that's going to provide a pretty big warm-up of the weekend in the Central Plains. But from there moving forward, let me get you past the weekend. And now let's look at where things get by the time we get into, well, let's stop Sunday afternoon. You can see that our low from the coast cut into Montana. And therefore, out ahead of this, we're going to expect to see some low pressure development and possibly some precipitation in the northern plains getting into the Canadian prairie. But this is going to be really starved for moisture. But here comes Teddy. See it? And as we move this farther along, early in the day on Monday, the European model continues to produce a trough just off the coast of New England. So remember, these spin in this direction. There's then this trough that's, of course, spinning this way, but that's associated with Teddy. And they're going to attempt to orbit one another. Can you see that? So the trough on the backside pulls Teddy around and potentially pulls it, as you see there, right into maybe Maine, but getting into the Canadian Maritimes. Now, this is just one solution. This is the European solution. But other things I want you to notice, this is next Tuesday. Look at what the European model has here, and look at the size of this trough cutting through the Gulf of Alaska. You see, these are critical pieces in the flow, and this is where things get a little bit hairy. As I go out here to next Thursday, this is a week from now, the European model in its latest run attempts to just really dive bomb this deep trough, excuse me, into the Great Lakes states and here into the Eastern Corn Belt. It was not in the previous runs. It is not, as you see here in the ensemble. This is next Friday. It's just not there. In fact, there's a ridge in that place, which means I'm going to have to watch that carefully. What is consistent? Lower heights here, and lower heights coming into the Pacific. Okay, any good model agreement here? Well, I went and grabbed the European operational, the GFS operational. And can you see again, that trough next Thursday, Friday, Saturday is really only showing up in the European. But it's something I want to watch because if it is in fact there and as deep as forecast, it could increase frost threat. At this stage, I can't, it's too uncertain to give you any sort of confidence in a forecast out that far. So let's do a little model comparison and see what precipitation looks like. On the left, I have the GFS, and on the right, the European. Let's play this forward and pause it. You see that they both handle where Sally's going to go pretty well. And then you see following that over the weekend, a large area of higher atmospheric pressure builds in right here over the Great Lakes. It's in both models. And at that same time, the trough cuts into the Pacific Northwest, and that's what increases the chances for showers and storms in the Pacific Northwest. Everything is in great agreement through this point of the weekend. By the way, very windy conditions out of the south, rebounding heat in the midsection of the country. I can see it in both models. Take a look at the Bay of Campeche, though. All right. What we see here is that during that time, the European is attempting to spin up a tropical system by Sunday morning. But the GFS is not. It's got a much more open wave. By the way, getting into Sunday, the low begins to form here out of Alberta into Saskatchewan. We do see some scattered showers around that. Very windy, though, from the South Central Plains up to Ontario. As we move forward in this forecast through let's just get through Monday morning, that low then pulls through parts of Manitoba, as you see here. So some scattered showers out ahead of it could pull into parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, maybe even as far south as Iowa, getting back to South Dakota. But notice at this point, the European is wanting to bring in very heavy rainfall on the northern edge of a well-defined tropical cyclone. And the GFS just doesn't have it. This is where the divergence in these models really begins to pick up. You see, the European at this point has now got a very well-defined system right here in the Gulf, nowhere to be found here. And also, this is when the European wants to dive bomb this deep trough coming out of parts of Manitoba through the Great Lakes. Watch it here. And there it is. And the GFS has a high pressure in that area at this time with a weaker low out ahead of it. So what I'm trying to explain to you is that through the next 5 days, I can go ahead and buy what the models are saying, except for what's happening out of the Bay of Campeche. Outside of that, it's really only confidence I have is in the troughs that keep coming through the Gulf of Alaska, increasing rainfall threat here through the Pacific Northwest. What you do notice in this forecast, though, is that if you're in the midsection of the country, things are relatively dry for a while. And both models and their ensembles agree that through the next 10 days, we're talking wetter here, wetter there. That's Sally leaving in the next couple of days. But right in the midsection of the United States, we do certainly have a drier pattern that's setting up. Okay. Now, week 2 only. This is the GFS latest run on the left and the European on the right. Again, it's those same features that we're talking about when we exclusively look at week 2. From there, let's talk about temperatures and other factors influencing our weather. We do have frost advisories. We have a freeze warning that's in place in parts of northern Minnesota that extends into Wisconsin and also parts of Michigan here. And we will be getting temperatures that will be getting into the 30s again tomorrow morning, cutting through parts of the lower part of Michigan as well. Flooding here, air quality issues in the western United States. To show you that, here's kind of just a new view that from our high-resolution rapid refresh model. So when you look at this is a cross-section. So you're going up in the atmosphere here and then across the United States like this. So this is elevation in black. So this is the mountains out west. This, for example, is the Great Lakes. That's where they go down close to sea level. And what I want you to notice is that wildfire smoke is really penetrating deep into the upper levels of the atmosphere, reaching altitudes here of about 9 kilometers. As we look at the temperatures, here's our high temperatures today, remembering that we do have a frost threat here in the next 2 days. But watch the temperatures really change over the next week. So Thursday's high temperatures quite chilly through the Great Lakes. and that extends into Friday as well. So this is going to be a real solid dose of fall-like weather, including a frost threat that could get down into this part of Michigan. But then you'll see the cool down in the west as the trough cuts in, but out ahead of it, the real big rebound in temperatures here in the high plains. Meanwhile, the cooler air in that front advances pretty far to the south and east, with high temperatures here in the Carolinas matching the high temperatures that we're going to be seeing here over like Wisconsin. So that's going to be an interesting setup across the country. Working our way into Sunday, the moderation happens in the midsection of the country, but it's cool in the southeast. Here's Monday's temperatures, Tuesday and Wednesday. After that, if we look at the 6 to 10 day forecast, we'd certainly see that both models agree of the warmer conditions that would be moving in and setting up in the Canadian prairies and in the Central Plains, while the cooler weather still cuts through the southeast. And even out today's 11 through 15, as the pattern relaxes here in the upper levels, primarily due to the development of a deeper trough in and around the Greenland area. That's going to shove the jet stream a bit farther north, and we do see warmer conditions to finish the month of September, begin October. Now, from this point forward, I would like to talk at the end of my video about South America. Over the last 45 days, it's been very dry in through this area, which is now able to plant its first crop of soybeans. And that just circled Mato Grosso, Bahia, Tocantins, that area. Minas Gerais as well. It's been much wetter down in southern Brazil. As we look out into the forecast over the next 5 days, we're going to still continue to wait on the monsoonal rains to come into this area. Scattered showers out of the Amazon and also to the south into southern Brazil. Argentina, very dry. But looking out at days 5 through 10, that's over here on the right, we do start to see more scattered storms coming out of the Amazon, clipping the northern part of Mato Grosso. This could be the beginnings of the monsoonal rains as they begin to arrive in this part of central Brazil. Now, as I try to understand what's going on there, I think some of this is related to the MJO. We do see very dry conditions over the next 5 days here. So we're just looking right on top of South America. But do you see how you get these greens coming into this area? This tells me that the upper levels of the atmosphere are going to breathe a little better and let for more moisture to really circulate around the developing monsoon. But as we look longer term in South America, I do want to discuss the La Nina, which we've been talking about quite a bit here, and its influence on South America. We know what we're expecting out of North America, right? In the absence of any tropical system that could come up into the U.S., I think I agree pretty wholeheartedly with what the European, what the NMME and the IMME are calling for overall drier conditions here with wetter in the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia. But right now our Southern Oscillation Index is very positive, well above the threshold of 7, which means La Nina is going, which means we tend to have a lot more storms here and a bit more suppressing motion on this side of the planet. We can see if you correlate in September and October that Southern Oscillation Index, we tend to be much wetter here over parts of Australia, Indonesia, getting into parts of China and India. It's very dry in through this area, and there is a weak bit of correlation with drier conditions here. Now, why I point that out is that through mid-October, even though we expect the monsoon to return, it may not return with the vigor that many would want it to in this part of Brazil. So we're still looking at drier than normal conditions through the beginning of October, even though it will begin to rain again. But I want to give you one last update here on some newer data that just showed up from the IRI multi-model group out of Columbia University. That's on the right. You see through October, November, December, the focus is starting to show up in southern Brazil, Uruguay, and parts of Argentina as dry. You can see the European model seeing that same feature with much more normal precipitation in through this part of Brazil, which means as the La Nina develops, I think our bigger concern moving forward in the forecast will be southern Brazil getting into Argentina. With that, I'm going to wrap this one up. I hope that you all have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you again next week. Thank you.